The snow fell gently outside the Santa Cruz Orphanage, covering everything with a white and silent cloak. It was December 1985, and after 15 years working as a teacher in that place, I knew every detail of the routine, every creak of the wooden floor, every shadow in the hallways. But since the new director, Mr. Marcus Wells, took over in October, something had changed. The children seemed quieter. It wasn't the natural silence of sadness that sometimes overtook them. It was something deeper, as if they were afraid to make noise. Especially little Sarah, 8 years old, who used to be the happiest in the group, now barely lifted her eyes from the floor during class. Her smile, which once lit up the room, had faded, and her eyes, usually bright, now seemed dull. The orphanage was 40 kilometers from the nearest town, surrounded by a dense pine forest. At this time of year, the sun set before 5 in the afternoon, plunging the Victorian building into elongated shadows that looked like dark fingers pointing at the windows. The environment, which had once been welcoming, now felt like a prison, and the atmosphere carried a weight that no one could ignore. "The Christmas party this year will be special," announced Mr. Wells during dinner, his voice echoing through the silent cafeteria. "All the children will receive personalized gifts." His gray eyes scanned each child's face at the table, lingering a little longer on some, as if he were assessing something beyond mere joy. "And we will have important guests. Hey, are you enjoying this Christmas horror story? Subscribe to the channel for more scary tales like this one." That was when I began to notice the strange preparations. Large boxers arrived during the night, but unlike previous years, no one was allowed to see their contents. Mr. Wells personally stored them in his office, which now remained constantly locked. Children whispered among themselves, and the tension in the air was palpable. One afternoon, while grading papers in the teacher's lounge, I heard muffled crying coming from the hallway. It was Sarah, curled up in a corner, hugging her knees. The sound of her sobbing was like a distant echo, a cry for help that no one else seemed to hear. "What happened, dear?" I asked, kneeling beside her. Her gaze was one of pure despair, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. He wants me to be special at the party," she whispered, trembling. "But I don't want to be special. I saw the drawings in his office when I took the documents you asked for. There were so many red circles, and names. My name was there." Before I could ask more, the sound of Mr. Wells's shoes echoed down the hallway. Sarah jumped up and ran, leaving behind a crumpled piece of paper. It was an old, yellowed flyer with strange symbols and words in Latin that I couldn't fully understand, but one phrase stood out: "Sacrificium innocentium menus nocte natalis Domini." What would you do if you found such a document in the hands of someone responsible for children? That night, while organizing the Christmas decorations with the other teachers, I noticed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The new wreaths that Mr. Wells had brought had symbols discreetly carved into them. The Christmas tree, larger than in previous years, was decorated with ornaments that seemed to contain similar inscriptions to those on the flyer. And then I found the list, fallen behind one of the decoration boxes. A sheet with the names of 12 children, exactly the number of orphans who had arrived in the last 3 months. Next to each name, a note: "Purity confirmed." My heart froze as I realized that the Christmas party was in 12 days. The following days were a nightmare of gradual discoveries. I began to pay more attention to the details, to the patterns that had previously seemed like innocent coincidences. Mr. Wells always selected exactly 12 children for the special Christmas preparation sessions. In his office, 12, like the days of Christmas. 12, like the names on the list. During meals, he closely observed certain children, discreetly taking notes in a black notebook. I noticed it was always the quietest, loneliest ones, those whose disappearance would go unnoticed. His gaze was penetrating, as if he were assessing their souls. On a particularly cold afternoon, while the children played in the snow-covered yard, I overheard a conversation between 2 older girls, Amanda and Julia, who were not on the list. "Did you see Sarah's eyes after she came back from preparation?" Amanda whispered. "They were different, empty. Like Claire's," Julia replied. "And she won't stop drawing those strange symbols." "Look," they showed me one of Claire's drawings, a series of concentric circles with symbols similar to those on the wreaths. But there was something more disturbing. Small figures that looked like children, arranged in a circular pattern, all with their heads bowed. The drawings seemed like a warning, but no one seemed to understand. At night, after everyone was asleep, I began to investigate Mr. Wells's past. On the municipal library's internet, I found old news articles about other orphanages where he had worked. In each of them, coincidentally, there were records of missing children always around Christmas, always in groups of 12. The connection was undeniable, and my heart raced as I realized we were in danger. The changes in the chosen children became more evident each day. They began to sing a strange melody during meals, a song in Latin that made my skin crawl. Their voices, once cheerful and childlike, now sounded monotonous and lifeless. It was as if their souls were being drained, and I felt powerless to help them. I tried to alert the other teachers, but they seemed enchanted by Mr. Wells's dedication to Christmas. "He's making everything so special," they said, with vacant smiles. Only Mrs. Thompson, the oldest cook, shared my concerns. "I've seen this before," she confessed one night, her hands trembling as she washed the dishes. In 1975, at St. Peter's Orphanage, 12 children, they tear. She couldn't finish the sentence, but her tears said enough. The fear in her eyes was contagious, and I knew I had to act. The orphanage's decorations became more elaborate and sinister. The Christmas lights flickered in strange patterns, casting shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. The smell of cinnamon and nuts, typical of Christmas, was now mixed with a metallic odor that no one else seemed to notice. It was as if the orphanage itself were alive, breathing an atmosphere of terror. One morning, I found Sarah sitting alone in the chapel, staring intently at the nativity scene. When I approached, I noticed she had rearranged the figures. The 12 apostles were in a circle, facing inward, and in the center. "This is where we will be," she said, without turning. "On the special night, he says we will be stars, that we will shine forever." Her words echoed in my mind, and a wave of dread washed over me. Only 5 days remained until Christmas, and I still had no concrete evidence to alert the authorities. Just coincidences, strange symbols, and the growing fear in the children's eyes. But that night, something changed. Something that would forever alter my understanding of the true horror that Christmas could hide. It was December 20th, and the snow was falling harder than ever, completely isolating the orphanage. The phone lines were silent due to the storm. Mr. Wells seemed strangely pleased with our isolation, as if he had been waiting for it. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I decided to risk everything. Using an old copy of the key I found in the storage room, I entered the director's office. What I discovered there still haunts my nightmares. On the walls, behind the heavy curtains, were photographs, dozens of them, organized in groups of 12. Each group showed different children from different orphanages, all with the same empty look that I now saw in Sarah and the others. And in each photo, in the lower corner, a date always December 24th, but from different years. On his desk, I found an old book, bound in dark leather. Ritualis Pororum, The Ritual of Innocent Stars. The title read in worn golden letters. The yellowed pages revealed the horrible truth. It wasn't just a ritual, it was an ancient tradition, practiced by a cult that believed that the sacrifice of 12 pure children on Christmas Eve would open a portal to something they called the true light of Christmas. In a locked drawer, I found the gifts that were to be given to the children. 12 white robes, too small for adults, stained with a yellowish hue suggesting previous use. Alongside them, an ornate chalice with the same symbols as the wreaths. Horror settled in my heart as I realized we were about to be part of something much larger and far more terrible than I could imagine. But the worst was yet to come. On Mr. Wells's computer, still on, there was an open email. "Everything is ready for the night of the 24th. The 12 observers have confirmed their presence. The circle will be completed after 108 years. The stars will finally align. Bring the purified children to the Great Hall at midnight. The portal must be opened when the last bell tolls." As I read, I heard footsteps in the hallway. I quickly turned off the screen and hid behind a file. Mr. Wells entered, accompanied by a man I had never seen before, dressed in a dark suit. "Are the children ready?" the stranger asked, his voice low and threatening. "Almost," The final purification will be tomorrow. Little Sarah is the key. Her innocence is absolutely pure. She will be at the center of the circle. Excellent. The other 11 will arrive on Christmas Eve. The ritual cannot fail this time. We have waited a long time for this specific alignment. I left the office hours later, when they finally departed. My mind was spinning with the implications of what I had discovered. It wasn't just a lone madman, it was an entire organization, planning something terrible for over a century. The next morning, I noticed that more children had started singing that strange melody during breakfast. Their eyes had a greenish glow that didn't seem natural. Sarah, especially, seemed different. She was now constantly smiling, but it was an empty smile, as if something inside her had been erased. I tried to call the police, using Mrs. Thompson's cell phone, the only one that still worked precariously, but the call dropped before I could explain everything. The storm was worsening, and now large blocks of ice blocked the access road. And then, on the night of December 23rd, I saw the lights. 12 black cars climbing the hill toward the orphanage, their headlights cutting through the snow like bright eyes in the darkness. My heart raced in my chest, and a feeling of despair took over me. The observers had arrived. December 24th. The snow was now a white curtain that completely isolated the orphanage from the rest of the world. The 12 chosen children, including Sarah, had been taken to the 3rd floor during the afternoon, where the suited men were preparing them for the celebration. The other staff seemed to be in a trance. Mrs. Thompson had disappeared after trying to call for help. Her cell phone was found broken in the snow, and fear spread like wildfire. At 11:30 p.m., I heard the beginning of the chants. I could wait no longer. I climbed to the great hall on the 3rd floor, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw there will forever be etched in my memory. The 12 children, dressed in white robes, were arranged in a circle. In the center, Sarah held the ornate chalice. The suited men, the observers, formed an outer circle, their deep voices chanting that ancient melody in Latin. Mr. Wells, wearing a red robe, led the ritual. Only 20 minutes until midnight, he announced. When the bells toll, the portal will open, and these children will be the keys to our true celebration of Christmas. I realized I had to act. While they were focused on the ritual, I sneaked over to the old sprinkler system in the ceiling. It was risky, but it was my only chance. With 10 minutes to midnight, I activated the fire alarm. Water began to pour, destroying the symbols drawn on the floor. Chaos ensued. The children, soaked, seemed to awaken from a deep trance. "No," shouted Mr. Wells. "The circle cannot be broken. The stars are aligned for the first time in 108 years. I took advantage of the confusion to pull Sarah from the center of the circle. The chalice fell, spilling its dark contents on the floor. The observers tried to restore order, but it was too late. The children were running in all directions, their white robes drenched. Then something inexplicable happened. When the first bell of midnight tolled, a greenish light began to emanate from the Hafirist symbols on the floor. Mr. Wells and the observers began to chant louder. "Desperate, you don't understand," Wells shouted. "This happens only once every 108 years. The portal, it needs to be fed. If it is not completed, on the 6th bell, the light intensified. On the 9th, the shadows on the walls began to move unnaturally. On the 12th bell, a chilling wind swept through the hall, extinguishing all the candles. And then, in the dark, we heard it. It wasn't screams, it was something worse. As if something very old and very hungry had been partially awakened. Mr. Wells and the observers were the first to run. I managed to get all the children out of the orphanage. When I looked back, I could swear I saw shadows moving in the windows of the 3rd floor, even though no one was inside. The police arrived the next morning, when the storm finally passed. Mr. Wells and the observers were never found. Investigations revealed a network of orphanages connected to similar disappearances over the decades. Sarah and the other children were transferred to different institutions. They say they are fine now, although sometimes they still sing that strange melody in their sleep. As for me, I could never celebrate Christmas the same way again. Every year, when the bells toll at midnight on December 24th, I can't help but think, what if the ritual had been completed? What would have emerged from that portal? And more disturbingly, When will the next 108-year cycle begin? What do you think really happened that night? Share your theories in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like, and subscribe to the channel for more disturbing tales. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any updates.